Well, welcome everyone. It's Jeff from the Burning Archive here, and I have a very special guest with me today. It's Marta Havryshko, who is returning to us from Boston, Massachusetts, I think, but a Ukrainian historian, and viewers will remember Marta from her wonderful interview a couple of months ago talking about the role of the far right and extreme ethno-nationalism, neo-Nazis in Ukraine. Welcome, Marta. It's great to see you again.
Thank you for having me.
So we're going to talk today about the sort of protests in Ukraine, which of course will connect to some of our previous discussions about, extreme nationalism and what's happened there over the last few years, but particularly around the protests that have developed over the last couple of weeks in relationship to the anti-corruption law. But before we do that, I did just want to mention to everyone that some friends and colleagues of Marta have prepared, some friends and colleagues of Marta have prepared an open letter in defence of academic freedom, and the Ukrainian historian Marta Havryshko. Marta, do you just want to tell us a little bit about this open letter that people can go to newglobalpolitics.org and read and potentially also sign?
Yes, so basically this initiative was drafted by my friends. Most of them are my colleagues. They are political scientists, sociologists, historians. So those who studies are particularly touched on Ukraine, and they are very worried about the recent developments in Ukraine, in particular in terms of academic freedom and free speech. And all those people who justify this crackdown on free speech in Ukraine due to the war must remember that some cases basically outrageous. Some cases are, and I believe my case is one of that cases because neo-Nazis group and far-right groups, because I'm constantly exposing them and calling them out. Neo-Nazi groups openly send me and my child death threats and rape threats. And many of my colleagues who are in Ukraine are making jokes about this. Then they downplay this. But we should keep in mind that in the past years in Ukraine, several people were killed by war veterans and those who have military experience and war experience and have very nationalistic and far-right views. And the most recent was Professor Irina Farion. She herself was very far-right, yes, but she was at first fired because of her public clash and public disagreement with the using of Russian language within Azov movement in Azov regiments, and then she was killed by allegedly by a man who is very close to far right, who took part in training of private sector, and whose father is now serves in Ukraine armed forces, and he's Russian speaking. So basically, it's very interesting because the case of Irina Farion is not only about the free speech, academic freedom, about political repressions, about political violence in Ukraine. It's also about instrumentalization of language issue. Because language issue in Ukraine, from the very beginning of its existence after the collapse of the Soviet Union, was a very hot potato. And it was instrumentalized and still instrumentalized by many, many political actors, including Putin, to justify his war of aggression against Ukraine. So if you care about free speech, about academic freedom, about human's dignity, and about democracy, please sign the letter because this letter is not only about me, it's about the general development, which is very troubling, not only in Ukraine. We observe this in so many different countries because of the rise of the far right.
Yeah, fantastic. And I'll include a link in the video description below. And look, I've signed the letter. I think so far I'm the only Australian to sign the letter. So hopefully a few Australian viewers, academic viewers or people who care about these kind of things will have a read. But also, I think Pascal Lataz from Neutrality Studies has, and Aaron Marte and Tariq Siroamar, and quite a few quite distinguished historians, including some very brave historians,
Yeah.
researchers and academics who are currently living and working within Ukraine as well.
Yes.
So do support Marta and academic freedom, and I guess the civil rights of people,
Yes.
Ukrainians, both within Ukraine and outside Ukraine, with that open letter. All
Yeah.
right, let's get into the protests then. So, Marta, I thought we'd just do, I mean, most people, I guess, would have followed these events over the last week or so, but just a really quick recap of kind of what's happened. And a lot of people have said these have sprung up
Yeah.
suddenly.
Yeah.
But I mean, I've been following your work for quite a while now, Diane Panchenko and others, etc. And there's been sort of kind of below the surface sort of efforts for a while, would you say, as well? Resistance to mobilisation, things like that. But these are the first real significant public protests for quite some time.
Yes, what we should keep in mind that these protests nationwide, in different major key cities in Ukraine, erupted very their scale and basically justified to the fact that this is the first large-scale protest after the start of Russian invasion in February 2022, because
Mm,
many people are not happy with Zelensky and his team. Let's remember that at the end of 2021, right before the Russian invasion, Zelensky approval rate was only 25%. That's why
mm,
many people said, "Oh, Putin is crazy. Why he's doing that? Zelensky is already unpopular. So his power is not so strong. His influence is not so strong. So he can be even maybe removed by impeachment
mm,
or some other procedures or stripped of his
mm,
power." But Putin made a really bad decision, and he invaded Ukraine, and he basically he contributed to this
mm,
rise of this image of Zelensky as a savior of the nation, as a
mm,
second coming. And so many intellectuals in the West started to portray him as national hero who is so brave and never left his people. You know, his famous
mm,
phrase, "I don't need a right, I need a weapon," and all
mm,
this stuff. So basically, and this image was very prominent in legacy media in the West, and of
mm,
course in all state-controlled media in Ukraine. And due to the war and martial law in Ukraine, only few media can portray themselves as somehow independent, like
mm,
Suspilne, like Hromadske, like Ukrainska Pravda, for example. But many of them are sponsored by Western powers, by USAID. Some of
mm,
them entirely are sponsored by Western sources. That's why
mm,
there are many questions about their independence.
mm,
And now, when those protests erupted, many people said, "Why? We didn't see even any signs. You know, we all were united." And some mainstream media in the West are trying to portray Ukrainian people as so united around Zelensky, but
mm,
it's not true. In
mm,
recent years, we have so many spontaneous protests against territorial recruitment centers. We have
mm,
so many women who organize themselves
mm,
to protest against this forced mobilization,
mm,
to rescue men. And
mm,
many of those
mm,
women, they don't know those men, but they understand this question as a big social injustice. It's a class question, because today Ukraine army turned into the army of of working class men and peasants, because the elite Ukraine sons and daughters of, first of all, sons, yes, because military service is mandatory for men, but it's still a choice for women. But their sons enjoying their best life. Former President Poroshenko, both of his sons are in UK. The
Mm,
sons of Klitschko, the mayor of Kyiv, are in Germany. The
mm,
sons of the mayor of Lviv, my native city, three of
mm,
his sons are abroad. They do
mm,
not volunteer to the army.
mm,
They do not sign this wonderful contract for young men from 18 to 24 years, because he said they want to obtain good education and then they will return to Ukraine and rebuild this Ukraine. And so, but many people don't buy those fairy tales. They
mm,
don't buy it
mm,
because Ukraine and what Pulse shows currently, that more and more Ukrainians are losing hope, and they
mm,
see Ukraine in a 10 years, for example, as completely devastated land
mm,
of pensioners, land of veterans, wounded people, maimed people without legs and arms, land without use, because nowadays many moms are taking their sons before they turn 18 and and take them abroad, because
mm,
they don't see anymore this bright future. And
mm,
many people see, as long as war continue, Ukraine will lose infrastructure, will lose territories, will lose its people. It will be a lost land, devastated, completely devastated
mm,
land. Even today, when Ukraine fall apart, when Soviet Union fall apart in 1991, there were approximately 50 million people in Ukraine. Nowadays, in Ukraine, we have 30 million people, and 10.5 of them are pensioners.
mm,
So it's already a big problem, demographic problem. And
mm,
many
mm,
young women, they left Ukraine. They wanted to protect their children. They don't want to keep them under constant shelling, under constant bombs. They didn't want to keep them in Ukraine. That's why it's very so when those protests erupted, some politicians who are just detached from reality, or some Western politicians who continue to repeat this talking point and mantra about Ukraine people who are ready to sacrifice their lives,
mm,
who are so united around Zelensky, they were surprised. What is going
mm,
on? And
mm,
some said, or it's all orchestrated. All those
mm.
students are paid students. And students started to make fun of this. They put slogans, I am paid student. Why they are doing, and for example, Ternopil Oblastna Rada
Mm,
supported Zelensky publicly. They said we should be united. And all those who are protesting, there are, only few people, and they are paid students who want just to make quick money. And
mm,
those students, and thousands of them in the streets of Ternopil, they started to make laugh of this,
mm,
because it was this narrative that all those people in the streets are responsible for this criticism of the West, of fueling Russian propaganda, but their anger is justified, is
mm,
legitimate, because
mm,
what Zelensky did by passing this law, he basically dismantled the main anti-corruption bodies in Ukraine,
yeah,
those two, NABU and SAPO, this
yeah,
National Anti-Corruption Bureau and the Special Prosecutor's Office, Anti-Corruption Prosecutor's Office. It was a major crackdown on these structures. And what was very interesting, the very procedure, how this law was passed, was very suspicious, because
mm,
this law was disguised as law about missing
mm.
people, missing in war people, and we have tens of thousands of missing people,
Oh,
and
really? And that, I mean, as I understand it, that's like I mean, there are allegations that say that some people who've been killed in Ukraine and hence their families are owed a pension, that they're classified as missing persons rather than killed, so that the state doesn't have to pay the pension. I don't know if that's a factual
Exactly.
statement, but that's what I understand to be the
Also,
case. Yeah.
yes, it's a
So
good call for Ukraine government. And
yeah.
it's such a great concern. My
Mm,
sister, one of my sisters, her husband is missing almost 2 years, and she received nothing from the state.
mm,
Nothing. Because
mm,
now they passed a law that all compensations for those missing people will be paid 2 years after the end of the war.
okay.
So they are interested, those political elites are interested in prolonging this war because
Mm,
they should pay it, enormous sum of money, and they don't have this money.
mm,
Recently, Zelensky, a couple days ago, he said, "Oh, we need to boost wages of our soldiers."
mm,
And we don't have those money, and we should ask our Western partners.
mm,
But how can you ask them why you underestimate these, concerns about the corruption in Ukraine? Who will give you those money when Western taxpayers are asking and posing questions? Where
mm,
are those money goes?
mm,
Go because recently it was a huge corruption scandal around the former deputy prime minister and the
mm,
Ministry of National Unity,
mm.
Oleksiy Chernyshov. He escaped from Ukraine because NABU, this major anti-corruption body agency, they
And
have
NABU stands for, oh, don't know what
NABU
happened there
is
with my,
National
but
Anti-Corruption Bureau.
Action Bureau. Yep.
Yeah,
Yep.
and NABU launched investigation
Mm,
about him, and they established that because of this corruption scheme that he orchestrated, Ukraine budget lost at least 1 billion hryvnias, and
mm,
he was put on trial, and Nabu recommended to dismiss him at least
mm,
and then proceed with investigation and put allegation and charges with corruption. But guess what? He wasn't dismissed even. And the
mm,
next day after the trial, he paid the bail $3 million. And people were just outrageous because constantly, every single day, people are asked, ordinary people, asked to donate to the army, donate to the drones, donate to evacuation vans, donate to everything. But at the
mm,
same time, the top level politician who belonged to inner circle of Zelensky, who is his close friend, is just
mm,
avoiding any justice, and people were so outraged. And guess what? Couple days later, he addressed this reconstruction forum in Rome,
mm,
where, so how dare you even to do that? People are thinking, investors are thinking, should we invest money in Ukraine? What are the risks of that? And this highly corrupted guy is addressing them.
mm,
So
mm.
it's just ridiculous. That's why
So
many people were so outraged about
yeah.
it.
I've heard some people, on YouTube channels, people commenting on things, that sort of stuff, say that it's unlikely that all these people in the street really care about corruption or the fate of these corruption agencies or this sort of thing. It's a bit of an arcane issue to protest about. But what I take from what you're saying is corruption is really is a kind of a lightning rod of a whole set of issues about concern about who is bearing the cost or the pain, let's say the pain and suffering of the war effort, really, and which is actually that's a very powerful kind of political emotion, I guess, isn't it? What was there's also been speculation about whether there was, a sort of a power play, I guess, by Zelensky in dealing with these particular corruption. I mean, there's been allegations that they were investigating his inner circle, but also that these corruption agencies were more associated with like, the Democratic Party in the United States. Maybe Donald Trump's not so activist in pursuing the corruption agenda, maybe. What's your understanding for why the president sort of acted against these corruption agencies at this particular time, and also in the kind of rushed way that he did?
I must say, very interesting that in 2019, when Zelensky took office, he made a video with statement, me and my team, we are not the same as our predecessors. We are not corrupt. So if you see corruption in my team, call Nabu. And this video now is so popular because 6 years later, he's trying to destroy Nabu because Nabu is very close to his buddies, to his very close friends. Because it's not only Chernyshov, most importantly, it's Mindic, who now escaped from Ukraine. And some journalists say that his family also left Ukraine and nowadays he's in Austria. Mindic was a business partner and still a business partner of Zelensky, long-term business partner. He is a co-founder and co-owner of this comedy entertainment Kvartal 95, where Zelensky was the main actor, the main comedian.
Yep.
And people call him, and experts call Mindic the wallet of Zelensky.
Sorry, wrong one. Hang on, just give me a sec.
Yes.
So this person here.
Yes, some experts, some politicians say that the main problem is that Nabu. Nabu is very close not only to Mindic, but also other people like Rahamia, who is the head of the president's servant of the People Party in the parliament, and also his right hand, Yermak. And Reznikov, who was the former minister of defense minister, and he also was involved in corruption scandal as well, but he completely avoided justice. So there is an assumption that Nabu prepared criminal cases against all inner circle of Zelensky. That's why Zelensky now he wanted just to dismantle their independence of Nabu and Sapo. And according to this law, he did this because they lost independence according to this law. Those two agencies now, according to new law, are subjected to the prosecutor general, who is completely the man of Zelensky, because prosecutor general is appointed by Zelensky. That's why it means that all those anti-corruption bodies, they basically now subjected to Zelensky. And what is very important, they made the raids. I mean, Security Service of Ukraine, SBU, made dozens of raids in homes and offices of Nabu agents, Nabu staff, and they took all materials, took all evidence. And now many politicians say that they will destroy this evidence. That's why many cases will be just closed, even if they roll back everything because of the pressure of the Western bodies. But now
they formally might sort of restore the agency, but in practice, they've lost all the evidence. The investigators are intimidated.
Exactly.
So and they won't be able to do their job. Yeah.
who testified against Zelensky and his inner circle. So
Mm.
they will find the exact names of
Okay.
parliament members who are members of President Servant of the People Party who cooperated with Nabu agents. That's why this information was so precious for them. That's
Yeah.
why they made searches without court warrants,
Yeah.
without court orders, very quickly, in order to take all those
Mm.
documents, all those materials, and
Mm.
probably destroy them,
Mm.
use them against oppositions, use them to make a purges
Mm.
in the servant of the people party and so on and so forth. It's very complicated issue.
So I've also heard some people say there was sort of international politics, I guess, involved in the decision to act because there's a interpretation that says these which I think has some validity, but that these agencies were set up kind of in 2014. Partly to deal with corruption, but also partly to exercise American government, particularly American government influence
Yes. Yes.
in Ukraine post 2014, and so is it in part a kind of defensive maneuver, I guess, from Zelensky about any concerns that what America might or investigations, but then other people say that those agencies are more associated with kind of Democrat Party politicians and things. What's your read of all that?
Yes, our viewers and listeners must keep in mind that yes, those agencies were initiated, developed, financed by Western powers, including a monetary bank, EU, including US Department of State. They consulted Ukraine government and they insisted, and establishment of those agencies were the precondition for Ukraine to develop this plan to enter EU. That's why there are so many speculations that basically Zelensky kidnapped and destroyed European dream of so many
Mm.
young Ukrainian people. That's why the major force behind protesters, behind the protests, are young people who
Mm.
have this European dream that Ukraine will
Mm.
once be a member of this wonderful democratic family of European family. So, and what is also very important that those agencies they have this so they in some sort they of course they were an instrument of Western power in Ukraine,
Mm.
and it's we can deny this, yeah,
Mm. Mm.
but at the same time, they those agencies created some checks and balances in Ukraine political system because
Mm.
corruption is one of the major problems in Ukraine.
Mm.
And according to some polls, some people in Ukraine say that corruption is even a bigger problem than Russian drones and rockets. Because
Mm.
corruption kills, corruption is bad weapon, is a lack of infrastructure,
Mm.
fortification, it's a lack of everything because everything
Mm.
is stolen.
Yeah.
That's why it's so important. But what about US? Why now? Why now?
Mm.
So the first, why now this crackdown and this development? So the
Mm.
first issue is yes, Nabu opened all these criminal cases against bodies of Zelensky. So it's a major reason. But the second reason is just yes, those agencies were associated with Democratic Party, and
Mm.
because of the change of political climate in US, inner circle of Zelensky really believed that Trump is not interested in these corruption scandals in Ukraine. He's not interested in this promotion of those issues, in
Mm.
transformation of Ukraine society. He really believes that this is not his problem.
Mm.
And basically, after passing this law, we didn't see any strong condemnation from the highest, officials,
Mm.
including Trump. Yes,
Mm.
we didn't
Mm.
see. So basically, it's partially true, yes, that MAGA movement is not basically interested in all these internal issues of Ukraine. But the second reason is in the recent months when Trump, put some people say that Trump put a lot of pressure on Ukraine, not on Putin but on Ukraine, not and on Zelensky, and so many leaders, European leaders, Macron, Merz, Ursula von der Leyen, they publicly, in this very performative way, expressed their support to Zelensky, that he believed that he will have a free hand because they need him. They need him in order to prolong war, to win time, to rearm their armies, to prepare their economies, to make money on producing weapons. So they need him. Uh, and he believed that because of that, he will just he will be given free hand and he can do whatever he want in order to save his power and to save his political bodies from corruption, scandals, and persecution. But instead of this, we observe the very troubling development, troubling for Zelensky, I mean, because it was the series of different, statements from EU leaders, Macron, Ursula von der Leyen, and other agencies, international foreign agencies. They asked Zelensky what they are doing. They warned Zelensky. They remind Zelensky that anti-corruption reforms and transformation is a precondition for entering. And recently, we found out that Ukraine already lost 5 billion of euro from EU because of failing to meet some criteria in fighting corruption. And why we observe this? Let's take Germany. In some regions of Germany, like East Germany, Alternative für Deutschland now has approximately 30% of support of voters. And this party is against war, prolonging the war, financing the war. They want to re-establish good relations with Russia. So basically, those politicians in European countries should take into consideration this outrage and anger of their taxpayers, of their own citizens, who are not happy with this war, who are not happy with militarization, who are not happy with this entire proxy war. We see that European economies, they are suffer from those sanctions. It was passed recently the 18th packet of sanctions, and Russia is most sanctioned country in the world. Approximately 20,000 sanctions are imposed on Russia. But what happened I remember all these politicians saying, oh, we will damage Russian economy, and we know that in order to wage war you need money, money, and money, and they say, oh, we will just destruct this economy. But what we observe, German economy is in very bad shape because of this, and all this gas, very high gas prices, and people in Germany are outraged. And one of the reasons because many refugees entered European country, and when
Yep.
I was last year in Berlin, I saw these anti-refugee leaflets. And those anti-refugee leaflets were about not Syrian refugees, not Afghanistan refugees, but about Ukraine refugees,
Ukrainian
because they
refugees.
have
Yeah.
preferential treatment, and
Yeah.
Bürgergeld that they receive are very high.
Yeah.
And I talked to my relative there, and he said to me, that our local authorities shrink the money to cultural events, to sponsoring, for example, free music classes for youth, because they don't have money. And now Trump said, you will buy our weapon. We are not ready anymore to send our money of our taxpayers. You will pay for all this, and now Europe should pay even more, despite of all these level of anger, disappointment, and frustration. Because when you observe the situation in the battlefield, in the front line, it's a dead end. It's a dead
Yeah.
end.
Dead end,
Nobody
yeah.
believed in their right mind in the winning of Ukraine military.
And that's, I mean, that's dry. I mean, again, returning to the scene that, there's these underlying concerns about the war effort that are sort of driving the protest as well. And like when people say corruption kills, I mean, they're not saying corruption's bad for democracy. They're not saying corruption is unfair. They're not saying corruption's illegal. They're saying corruption kills. And there have been controversies, haven't there, about like drone contracts with fortifications that haven't been built, with paying off the sort of mobilisation officers, paying off people to get out of the country. There's concerns around corruption with
The
selling off
question of
Ukrainian
corruption
assets.
nowadays in a wartime for Ukraine, it's not only a question of financial security of the people. It's not about this. It's mostly about security. Corruption is a security question, and it's heavily related to the how army functions and how the whole draft system functions. Because nowadays in Ukraine, everyone knows how many thousands of dollars or euro you should pay in order to leave the bus where you were thrown by draft officers, to leave the territorial recruitment center without mobilization draft paper. Everyone knows how to pay in order bribe in order to leave country, because we know that there is a ban for I call it open air prison for men age 18, 16, because no one can live except some, very precise categories of men. And everyone knows how to pay for medical paper that you have severe disabilities and you can be drafted. So basically the whole system of mobilization is so corrupted. That's why every single day we see, oh, this head of territorial recruitment center, he bought several cars, he bought several houses. How? We know how, because it's a highly corrupted system nowadays. It's a highly corrupted sphere. That's why I must say, and our viewers must keep in mind that the first person who made the call for people to go out to the streets and protest was a war veteran, Dmytro. And he made this post. He was the first one who publicly called for protest. And he made the comparison with this Yanukovych government, because Yanukovych was associated with enormous corruption in Ukraine. And he said,
Yeah.
no, we don't want another Yanukovych, meaning we don't want another major corruption that will damage Ukrainian society and
Yeah.
will cause our way to democratic and prosperous society and
Yeah.
secure society. Yeah.
Yep. Is that this person here, Dmitro Olink, or is that another person? But this
It's
is another
it's
veteran who's
another
been
person, but
targeted in the
yeah,
crackdown.
but
Yeah.
it's worth saying when people say, "Oh, look, it's a democracy, it's a blooming democracy in Ukraine," because we don't see protests nowadays under Putin in Russia, but Ukrainians are freely, protesting, and they, use very daring
Yes.
slogans. But we should keep in mind that some protesters are already face some pressure from Ukraine government, and for example, this guy, this war veteran, was summoned by SBU, Security Service in Ukraine, and to explain what he did in this protest, and they started to disseminate some version that he is a fake veteran, fake soldier. That's why he disseminated his photos from the front line, from the heavy battles in the uniform, in the
Yeah.
combat appearance. Yes, but recently he said that he visited SBU and it was a pleasant conversation. But I believe it happened because he made it public and he was very well prepared. Because what we observe, men, veterans with prosthetic legs and prosthetic arms are protesting as well.
Mm.
So the major force when we see who are protesting, the major group is the students because they are
Mm-hmm.
safe. Yeah, because those
Yep.
guys can be drafted. So basically, draft officers can't kidnap them and put into the vans because they don't
Yep.
subjected to the draft under the Ukraine law. So they are protected in this regard. And every, let's say, every revolution in Ukraine, Orange Revolution, Maidan Revolution, was started by students. They are most vocal, they are most active, and they are, for them it's some kind of entertainment, even, some
Mm.
kind of socialization. They
Mm.
and because of the martial law, they are so thirsty of this, some entertainment, let's say. They are
Mm.
happy, they are making jokes, they are making
Mm.
funny posters. They so for them it's a fun, for them it's a, but they are allowed to do that in many cases
Mm.
because Western countries are watching closely what is going on. And
Mm.
even the best friend of Zelensky, Lindsey Graham,
Mm.
yeah, who is the main hawk here in US, he even made a statement calling for Zelensky, don't make it, it's not a joke. You should
Mm.
you should develop these anti-corruption reforms
Mm.
because it's not a joke. So even he made them. So even he reacted to this, this disgraceful move of Zelensky's and his inner circle. But
Yeah.
many of protesters also were veteran and children of those who are in the front line. That's why
Yeah.
they have a signs. My mother is not fighting for this shit.
Yeah.
My father didn't die for this
Yeah.
shit.
Yeah. Yeah.
This protest is paid by our blood or blood
Mm.
of our loved ones. So they are reminding Zelensky that we are in war.
Mm.
And despite the war and these major losses, human losses, you are caring about the pockets of your friends. You
Mm.
are making money.
Mm.
Also, you are making money from all this Western support for security
Mm.
service from the for the army. How dare you? That's
Mm.
why it's also connected to this security question. And we should keep in mind that armed forces in Ukraine, they have the highest support in Ukraine government, not Zelensky, not
Mm.
of course police, not of course judges and prosecutors who are perceived as very corrupt, but army. Approximately
Mm.
10 to 90% of Ukrainians, they support army
Mm.
because they perceive them as the defenders, as those who secure Ukraine's future.
And that's, I guess that's going to be a bit of an issue when it comes to, I mean, what's the ultimate sort of kind of civil society type solution to the internal conflicts in Ukraine. Maybe, I mean, I guess the other thing just to say about protests is they grew significantly after the sort of back down or to sort of withdraw the legislation.
Yeah.
Are they still going on? I'll just bring up a couple of these pictures as well, just also, and maybe we can just comment on a couple of the aspects of the protests as well. But
Yes.
are the protests sort of still going on?
Yes, they are still
Yep.
going on, and now they are. This is from this poster is from my Lviv. So
Mm.
the poster reads, "She is not born yet, but she's already disappointed by the government."
Mm.
So we observe many women as well involved in the protests, and they are very vocal, and they have a very daring slogans. And I must say, I'm proud of those women because
Mm.
they execute their right to protest and their right to express themselves in public space. And this
Mm,
right, they were stripped of this right for centuries. We know
mm,
that public domain was preoccupied by male voices and men, and women were at home. And now they enjoy this feminist achievement. They are in the streets and they are very vocal.
mm,
But there are also many controversies because women
mm,
who brought their children, some of
mm,
those women, very small children, they brought and they gave them these cardboard pieces with the swear words. And there
mm.
is a hot discussion nowadays in Ukraine about using this swear word. Some people
Yeah,
say, "Oh,
yeah.
it's against children's rights." Um, Yes, I want to also
This is
comment on
another.
this.
Yeah.
Zelensky should step down.
Mm,
And this is the most unpleasant for Zelensky voice. And
mm,
we remember the recent piece in Telegraph, authored by Matthews.
mm-hmm,
And the article reads, "For the sake of Ukraine, Zelensky must step down." And his slogan and his point basically is very similar to this one.
mm,
I started to voice the same slogan after this Oval Office disaster in
mm,
Washington here in the White
mm,
House. I was so disappointed by the behavior of Zelensky. I was so angry, and I started to voice this point that he must go
mm,
because he do not fulfill his obligations to be a national leader in this
mm,
very very tough time, very difficult time. And Zelensky, because of this impeachment issue, Zelensky is not very loved person in
mm,
Trump's inner circle. And
mm,
we all observe this. And Zelensky team made so many mistakes during election presidential campaign in US
mm,
because they couldn't even predict that Trump will be a winner. That's why they cooperated with Democrats, and state-controlled media openly
mm.
criticized Trump with very daring words. And I
Mm.
was like, "What are you doing, guys?
Yeah,
It's not
yeah,
decided, yes,
yeah,
yet." And when Trump won the election,
yeah,
my father didn't die for
yeah.
this.
This was a great example of what you were saying before. My
Yeah,
my father didn't die for this. Yeah,
yeah, it's very important to show those slogans. Yeah, that
yeah.
people
And
have
I mean,
very,
just commenting too. I mean, I believe I don't know how much this is caught on, but I saw Le Monde at least was describing these events as the cardboard revolution. I
yes,
don't know if it quite has reached that standard yet, but it is and this is partly a comment on the speculation that these are paid for protests and not spontaneous. Because I mean, these most of the slogans, like compare it to say the Georgia protests or I think even there was some protests in South Korea just quite recently, which all had highly produced, or even like protests in America about no kings and that sort of thing. It's much more highly produced, high cost stuff. This is
yes,
cardboard. Often the cardboard looks like it's been folded, like it's been concealed in a bag, and it's just handwritten slogans. And the
yes,
slogans themselves, you've got a few here in this tweet here, but I've read also a lot of the slogans are both, some of them are almost quite literary, like there's references to Ukrainian literature and things like this, but also there's this sort of mocking callback to various things that Zelensky has said. So it's a very there's sort of political slogans that are very much in a kind of Ukrainian dialect, so to speak. Would you
Yes.
say? Yeah.
Yes, it's very, the slogans, we can divide them into different groups.
Mm,
One group of slogans refers directly to Maidan. That's why you
mm,
have slogans, for example, is it 2013? So
mm,
is it start of this revolution? Are we, rolled back to this point when we
mm,
need to once more protest this fucking shit? Meaning,
mm,
so
mm,
are we there now?
mm,
Then
mm,
is it you, Yannick? Yannick is
mm.
a shot from Yanukovych, meaning
Yanukovych.
they compare Zelensky with Yanukovych. And
Mm,
of course, many of those people, when they give interview, they make a direct connection to Maidan, because
mm,
Maidan is when we observe memory politics in Ukraine, Maidan is in this core of this national memory, not only the Second World War and
mm,
independent movement, nationalist movement for Ukraine independence, but from recent history, it's a Maidan. Yeah, it's a
mm,
pay tribute to those who protested, to those who were killed. Yes,
mm,
especially heavily
mm,
harmed. So Maidan is portrayed as a major event in the modern Ukraine history.
mm,
And those young people who were kids during Maidan, because Maidan was in 2013, 2015, so basically 11 years ago, many of those people, they know about Maidan from these commemorative events, from
mm,
some lessons in their schools, from history books. And in history books, Maidan is represented as, revolution of dignity. It's a
mm,
major event in Ukraine history. And Yanukovych is compared to all as a villain, is a pro-Russian devil. It's a
mm,
betrayal, a traitor who betrayed Ukraine. That's why when they compare Zelensky to Yanukovych, it's a very serious. It's a
mm,
very serious allegation. The
mm,
second group is directly about Zelensky. And some use slur words,
mm,
swear words, and some repeat his very infamous or famous phrase, "I am not a sucker," that he told in 2019 in Donbass, where he has a confrontation with Ukraine war veterans and Ukraine military personals, because they were not happy with Minsk agreement, because they said, "Oh, it's not good for Ukraine security," and they refused to withdraw their troops. And it was the first major public disobedience to Zelensky as a chief
mm,
commander.
mm,
And Zelensky was trying somehow to prove that he's a national leader, that he's a
mm,
capable commander, that he's not just comedian, just comic. And he said, "I am not a sucker. I
mm,
understand all risk. I calculate everything." And people started to shout, "I am not a sucker," meaning, are you sucker? Do you understand what are you doing? Do you understand that you are
mm,
destroying our European dream?
mm,
Because
mm.
recently some experts say that approximately 84% of Ukraine youth, young people, want to leave Ukraine. And in
Mm.
order to keep them in Ukraine, yes, and I described this in
Yes.
my piece in Berliner Zeitung. And I
Yep.
posed the main question: how it will end for Zelensky, because now he's compared with Yanukovych. There are some very radical people even burned his portrait,
Mm,
his and Yermak portrait, and they
mm,
call them demons. And they chant this, they are chorty, they are demons in Ukraine politics. That's why it's very dangerous for Zelensky, and it's very dangerous for
yep.
Yermak. And they are calling. He wasn't elected. Yermak wasn't
Yep.
elected, but why he's main decision maker? And nowadays in Western media, we have numerous articles about Yermak and his direct
Mm,
influence.
mm,
He was behind this PR campaign in Kursk region. He was behind so many decisions. And
mm,
people believe that he has enormous influence on Zelensky. And as we know, Zelensky never separated with Yermak when it
mm,
comes to very serious
mm,
conversations, meetings, interviews to foreign media, he's always there. He's like,
yeah,
shadow of Zelensky. And people are
yeah,
angry because they don't believe him. And Yermak, in 2019, 2022, 20, before the full-scale invasion of Russia, Yermak was basically called the Russian asset and the Russian agent. And yes,
mm,
and many people believe that he is not caring about Ukraine national interest. And
mm,
what we see in even this anti-corruption law was passed in cooperation with so-called pro-Russian opposition
mm,
party.
mm,
And so many
mm.
people in this opposition party uh, were called
Actually,
Russian agents. That's why
yeah,
people don't believe Yermak and don't believe his inner circle. But when we talk about other slogans, one of the slogans is "We are not a Russia." So basically,
yeah.
yeah, and
I
it's a
might even
very
have one
important
of
issue
those.
because they are trying to compare Ukraine development and Ukraine struggling democracy, let's say, with the authoritarian regime of Putin. So two major ideas here. We have a
Yeah,
democracy. We have the chance to protest and show our anger.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
and
I think you
Zelensky.
had I might add it in the editing, but you had a shot from a protest in Kharkiv with that slogan as well. But the one
Yes.
I have here is about how much is your signature worth, Mr. President, which emerged after
Yes.
the back down on the agency as well.
Yeah, because this law was very quickly signed by Zelensky,
Yeah,
while some anti-corruption law that were necessary and required by Western countries, Western agencies, were not signed for 4 months, 6 months, and so on and so forth. But this law, so the very procedure, very quick procedure, also was very suspicious. Why are you so in a hurry? Why you need to sign this so quickly?
mm,
Yeah.
mm,
So it was very suspicious. That's why people blame directly Zelensky. And the first people appeared in the streets near President office before he put his signature under this law. And the first demand was veto, please don't dare sign this law or
mm,
we will continue protests. And
mm,
nowadays, the main result is Zelensky is losing rapidly
mm.
legitimacy.
Yeah,
He is losing rapidly. People don't believe him.
yeah.
He's trying to present this as a mistake. Oh, I was so busy to read this law. But it's not just a mistake. It was very conscious move. And all
Yeah.
people understand this.
Yeah, totally. And look, we might come back to that, and also to the European Dream thing, because that's the main, I guess, theme of your piece in Berliner Zeitung. I've got that right,
Yes.
haven't I?
Yes.
Which I'll include a link in the description below for people, and you can get a German, translation if you don't
Yes.
need. But there were a couple of these protests which I couldn't quite understand, and again, it might be this thing that there's different elements in the protest as well, but there was this protest in Lviv where people were doing "Who doesn't jump is a Moscow," which is a kind of a derogatory term for a Russian kind of thing, which was something that was occurring during the Maidan events, etc. I think from memory,
Yes.
but some people think maybe it's not the Ukrainian protests' finest. How do you interpret this? Oh, you say it's their signature Bandera style. How do you interpret? I mean, I guess, and then also we have this somewhat strange event where some people came in late, I believe, in a protest with red flares and masks and
Yes.
that sort of thing. How do you interpret those kind of aspects of the protest?
So who doesn't jump is Moscow is very a racist slogan, I believe. And when I posted this, many people in comment section started to say, "Oh, Ukraine's is a legitimate anger because of the war crimes of Russians. They are
Mm, mm,
so so." Basically, they gave them a right to do that, and they justify the slogan. But
mm,
those people who don't understand Ukrainian culture deeply can't understand that Moskal is not only ethnic slur for Russians. Moskal has a very wide meaning, and in Ukrainian society, Moskal, people who are using Russian language are called Moskal in Western Ukraine and especially in Lviv and in Galicia.
okay.
I was born in Galicia. I know. My husband was called Moskal because he's ethnic Russian and he speaks Russians. My son
Mm,
was called Moskal because he's using Russian language as well. He's using
mm,
both language, but when he's using Russian language, he's called Moskal. Moskal in Galicia, in Galician mindset, in
mm,
Galician worldview and mental map, Moskal is not only a Russian. It's a person who likes Pushkin and Dostoevsky. It's a person who commemorate Red Army on the 9th of
mm,
May, on the Victory Day. Those who really believe that OUN and DUPA are not worth of commemorating, like Waffen-SS Division Galicia and others, Moskal are those who visit Ukraine Orthodox Church of Moscow Patriarchate, the main and the
okay.
biggest church
Okay.
in Ukraine.
Yeah.
So basically, it's a very Western Ukraine style slogan. It's a very
Okay.
nationalistic slogan that was used actually by Ukraine nationalist movement that I study. And I remember I studied their documents from 1930s, 1940s. They also
Yeah.
used the word Moscow to call those people, for example, who don't support UNO and UPA and their terror, who
Mm,
are the heads of their, of collective farms, kolkhoz, who support Soviet national project and Soviet Ukraine. They were also called Moskal. So if you revitalize this slogan in current political life, it works for division, for creating more division inside Ukrainian
mm,
society, for
mm,
creating this stigmatizing language. Because we know recently one of the fighters said that approximately 70% of infantrymen on the battlefield are using Russian language. And all
mm,
these patriotic games, when people call all the Russian speaking people as traitors, it's not
mm,
productive. It's
mm,
not productive. It plays actually into Russian propaganda because it
mm,
divides
mm,
heavily Ukrainian
mm,
society and it creates so
mm,
many divisions and tensions inside Ukrainian society.
mm, mm.
That's why I'm deeply against using those slogans.
Those kind of slow, but I guess I mean it's been a bit without excusing it, it's been a bit intertwined, I guess, with the do we go to Europe path versus do we go to Russian world cultural world path sort of thing. Would that be without? I mean, I'm not endorsing it or anything like that, but I mean, would that be a sort of explanation, I guess, for why it's here? Because I mean, your principal argument, I guess, is that a lot of these protests are motivated and driven by the desire, if I've understood it correctly, to sort of both resist all the oppression of the war mobilisation, but also to reactivate the European dream of
Yes,
the sort of early
I must say
Maidan.
that Russian media, state-controlled media, they portrayed some of those protests as anti-war protests, and it's not true.
Mm.
Most of them
Mm-hmm.
all of them, I believe, support
Mm.
war efforts. And
Mm.
for them, the question of corruption is a question of Ukraine's strengths in this war. Question of strengths of Ukraine army, its capability, the strengths of
Yeah.
Ukraine soldiers, and so on and so forth. Because nowadays, as you see, thousands of men from Colombia, for example, are drafted to Ukraine army, and you need to pay them. And many mercenaries from Western countries, for example, even from my US, they also serve in Ukraine army, and their payment are higher. Their salaries are higher. And nowadays, when we experience shortage of manpower in Ukraine military, that's why they heavily rely on neo-Nazis from around the world and on mercenaries. Ukraine need money. It needs money, and all those protesters, they are not against. They do not protest against war efforts. They don't want to stop resistance to Russia. They don't have any plan in their mind, and they don't propose any plan how to stop the war. They want to continue. Why? Because 90% of those protesters, they are not involved in war. They don't pay price, basically. Maybe their relatives are fighting. Maybe their mothers and fathers, like some of slogans, some of posters saying. But them, but most of those people, they're young people, and they're exempted from the military. So they are not paying this ultimate price. And I
Yeah.
must say, the most hawks in Ukraine society are pensioners and people of this
Yeah.
category, are young
Yeah. Yeah.
people
Yeah.
who are not
Yeah.
involved in the military, who are not
Yeah.
under these, Russian drones, who are not in these trenches, who are not in the hot battles for months without leave, without any vacations, and so on and so forth. That's why they don't understand. Basically, they don't understand even the mindset of soldiers. Some of my brothers, for example, in the army, they experience nowadays suicidal thoughts, this military trauma, exhaustion, but nobody cares. They can't even receive this, permission to go and take some rest and to recover and so on and so forth. And many soldiers, it's a major problem in Ukraine nowadays that nobody promised those soldiers who volunteered in February, in March 2022, that they will go
Yeah.
home because
Yeah.
there are no soldiers to substitute them. So those protests are not anti-war protests like
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Russian media.
No, that's a really
They
good
are not anti-war
clarification,
protests.
Marta.
They are
Yeah. Yeah.
pro-war protests, I believe.
Yeah. I think I've seen there was one slogan which was something like support, like corruption at home weakens the front or something like that.
Yes,
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah, yeah.
Exactly.
So, which is prompting memories for me of like 1917 in Russia and people, sort of
Yeah,
corruption at the court and
yeah.
weakening the front as well. But not that I'm suggesting it will go in that way. How do you see this developing politically? I did read a article, I think, on in translation on strana.ua, which was suggesting that there's a kind of a free phase plan, maybe by some of the people. I think they were implying that the key person behind some of the protests is Poroshenko,
Yes.
um,
Many people
uh,
believe yes.
and that the former the chocolate king oligarch and former president, uh, who has also been subjected to, I think, some level of investigation and political repression. Any political protest is going to have some organised leaders. So
Of course.
but he seemed to be the Strana article seemed to be suggesting that there was a desire to first remove Yermak from office, and then and then to sort of remove Zelensky from office, or at least to make him a more symbolic leader.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Because this law actually is about concentration of power. It's about
Mm,
authoritarian tendencies in Ukraine. That's why so many
mm,
people are talking about democracy and the threat to Ukraine democracy.
mm,
And for many people in the West, it's a major question. Why, why you should, even my taxes here, because I'm UX tax resident already, are going to Ukraine, and we finance all those judges, prosecutors,
mm,
politicians who are corrupt, and
mm,
who are buying
mm,
houses here in US. That's why many
mm,
people ask question, and reasonable question, why we should sponsor this autocracy if it's the same as Russia, Putin's Russia, but in Vyshyvanka and with Ukrainian language and with Bandera, instead of Lenin and Stalin, for
mm,
example. That's why, yeah. And when we observe, the role of Poroshenko is big in this event.
mm,
We should keep this in mind. Why big? Because Poroshenko was sanctioned already by Zelensky. And I must say that the very mechanism of personal sanctions imposed by Zelensky, no one in present office in the course of Ukrainian independence practiced personal sanctions. Those sanctions started to practice by Zelensky even before the start of the war, actually. So
mm,
he started to use this illegal, anti-constitutional, extrajudicial mechanism even before the Russian invasion.
mm,
That's why when people say, or, because of the war, he should have this, extra power. No, guys, these tendencies we observe already in 2021.
mm,
So the first sanctions were imposed against Ukraine citizens, I mean, not against,
mm,
Russian citizen or other, against Ukraine
mm,
citizens. And they
mm,
are illegal because there is no judge ruling, court ruling. You
mm,
should have
mm,
court ruling.
mm,
But he used this mechanism, which is provided by security service of Ukraine. Yeah. So
mm,
they
mm,
open the investigation. They say, oh, this guy is, he's probably a traitor. Yeah, he's spreading Russian narratives. For example, one of the Russian narrative is this war is proxy war. They call it
mm,
Russian narrative. Imagine, yeah. So, and they call
mm,
everything basically every
mm,
criticism of Zelensky and his corruption. They call nowadays Russian narrative. If you dislike, Nachtigal unit, which is named after Nazi collaborationist unit, and this Nachtigal unit in Ukraine, of course you are Russian agent. If you dislike using Waffen as insignia in Ukraine armed forces, always Russian narrative. So basically, they
mm,
speculate. So Poroshenko was already sanctions, and nowadays there is an open criminal investigation against him and against Mayor of Kyiv Klitschko. That's why
mm,
Klitschko was already in the protest for 2 days in a row, I believe, and Poroshenko's members of Poroshenko's party. Европейская солидарность, European Solidarity, they also participated in the protest. And they were among those who blocked the
mm,
were trying to block the process of adopting this anti-corruption law, and they were very
mm,
vocal. And nowadays they introduced a separate law to roll back everything to strengthen this
mm,
independence of Nabu and Sapo. That's why the main beneficiary of these protests is Poroshenko. That's why his parliament members are already are visiting all protests. They are posting all controversial materials, and they prepare, and we believe, and I hope that they will release this Mindich records, because
mm,
Nabu, using the apartment of Hennady Bogolyubov, the business partner of Kolomoisky, they were listening to all those conversations of Zelensky and his inner circle in the apartment of Mindich. And it
mm,
is believed that Zelensky said, I give a shit about those Ukrainians.
mm,
So we are impatient for
mm.
releasing these records because it will be major attack on Zelensky. And I believe if
Yeah.
Poroshenko will receive this permission from the
Mm,
West, he will
mm,
release this, and Zelensky will be stripped of his power, and he can be in the office and but be only symbolic figure, I believe. Yes,
mm,
it's very important. But if he will continue confrontation with the opposition, he will be removed like Yanukovych, I believe. He will.
mm,
He has high chances to be removed as Yanukovych. But recently he already introduced his own law, but it's very also this law also is not is have many contradictions because, for example, he introduced a norm that all NABU members should undergo every 2 years this polygraph check-in. But for what?
Okay.
No,
This sort of lie test
but
sort of thing.
I
Yeah.
believe it's just, in order to justify his, notion that we made those searches and cracked down on Nabu to erase this Russian influence, yeah, because they were allegedly collaborating with Russian FSB and Russian oligarchs and so on and so forth. But we'll see. But the main problem now, according to Financial Times and many and some politicians close to Poroshenko, dozens of members of presidential party are not ready to vote for this law. Why? Because they afraid of repercussions, because there are already open criminal investigation about the corruption against them. That's why they afraid to re-establish this independence of Nabu and Sapo, because they're afraid of reprisals from Nabu and Sapo, they say. And some rumors, some politicians say that some of them are already left Ukraine together with their families. And we know that many Ukraine politicians, they don't put their money in Ukraine banks, but they keep their money at homes, just in case, and prepare just in case, yeah, to escape the country, just in case, because yeah, it's a very corrupt system. It's a very corrupt
Yeah. Yeah.
system. That's why
Yeah.
it's so it's so difficult, to combat this system, because it's just everywhere. You pay
Yeah.
bribes everywhere. You want your child to be enrolled in kindergarten, you pay bribe. You want your child to be enrolled in better school, you pay bribe. I remember my mother undergo mastectomy because of the oncology, and I was required to pay a bribe to the doctors and to pay for medications. And when they started to make no noise, I was told, "Do you really want to start this? Don't you care about your mother?" So they started to shame me that
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't want to help my mother. And I was like, and of course I paid those bribes just to keep my mother alive. And,
Yeah.
but it was so disappointing for me,
Yeah. Yeah.
and it's everywhere. It's in
Yeah.
every sphere of Ukraine life,
Yeah.
everyday
Yeah.
life.
Yeah. Yeah.
When you listen to Ukrainians, when you know all this,
Yeah.
that's why it's so for many Ukrainians it's so painful issues, because now, because of the war and this unfair mobilization, poor people are dying, and wealthy people are becoming more wealthy and more rich, because they are profiting from this war by establishing all those schemes. So the class moment is very present in this war, and people are very unhappy because of that. You know, yeah.
So it sounds like there may be some. You're indicating that maybe Poroshenko is in dialogue with Western partners for some
Exactly.
sort
I
of,
believe, of course,
release of documents that will create a scandal and maybe move the political situation on in some
yeah.
way. In that case, would Poroshenko end up in political office, or is he
I
more like a kingmaker?
I don't believe that Poroshenko will take office, because all polls show that people don't believe him. People don't believe him. He has a very low support, and the main candidate for the office is Zaluzhny. That's why Zaluzhny is everywhere now. He's commenting
Yeah. Okay.
everything. He's making, some silly photos in gym with, title, "Our fight, we will fight," and people are making
Yeah.
jokes about it. But still, Zaluzhny is portrayed as a person who can save Ukraine, because the main problem for Ukraine, one of the main problem, is the war, and he
Yeah.
was portrayed as a very knowledgeable military leader. And
Yep.
he was, you know, he basically was removed by Zelensky because his popularity was so high, and Zelensky
Yep.
couldn't stand it. That's why he removed him.
Mm.
And
Mm.
he was sent to Great Britain. And we know the role of Great Britain in this proxy war
Mm.
against Russia in planning all those operations, you know, web
Mm.
and all terrorist attacks and assassinations in the
Mm.
territory of.
Mm.
So
Yep.
MI6 played a huge role in this. That's why he was sent not in, you know, Czech Republic, not in Brazil, you know, not in South Africa,
Poland,
yeah, not in Congo.
neighbour
He was sent
to
to the
Britain.
key decision makers
Mm. Mm.
who can support him and I believe will support him. So
Mm.
the
Mm.
scenario is that Zelensky probably will be stripped of his major influence. He will lose this decision-making role, and they will try to arrange some elections. And
Mm.
each arrangement will be, I believe, will be supported by Putin because Putin also often question legitimacy of Zelensky, and he don't
Mm.
want to sign any deal with Zelensky. He
Yeah.
always talk about, you know, his legitimacy,
Yep.
and so on and so forth, and he demands election. And I believe Zelensky, and I believe there will be some deal in
Mm.
order to have an election in Ukraine.
Mm.
And as a
Mm.
result of this election, Poroshenko actually, not Poroshenko, but Zaluzhny, I believe. But the problem is, Zaluzhny is a military man. And
Mm.
if he will be the next puppet of the
Mm.
West, he will prolong this force mobilization. And
Mm.
he will prolong this policy of closed borders and keeping Ukrainian men as slaves.
Mm.
You know, that's
And
why.
Shaluzhny's also, as I understood it, like he used to have two photos of Bandera in his office, and
Yes, and
like he at least, I mean, it might have been tactical in the situation, but he appears to have some quite close associations with Azov and the
Yes, he
extreme
had
nationalists.
relations
Yeah,
with different neo-Nazi groups. He
yeah,
supported this, you know, Svaston clothing brand. And Svaston, to our viewers, Svaston in Slavic
yeah.
languages, especially in Ukrainian Russian, is basically swastika. And they produce, you know, this racist stuff, and he's collaborating and he's making ads for them. He's introducing these clothes. So it's a shame. You know,
Mm.
it's a shame that Commander in Chief, you know, was involved in promoting all this Nazi stuff in Ukraine, these
Mm.
hateful clothing brands. And he's close with many Azov movement, with leaders of Azov movement and leaders of other far-right units. So I don't believe that Ukraine will change under Zaluzhny will
Mm.
change this nationalistic, ethno-nationalistic
Mm.
agenda,
Mm.
this anti-Russian move, because his slogans, when we listen to him, you know, it's the same. You know, it's very
Mm.
similar talking points to
Mm.
all this Armia Mova Vera, you know, very nationalistic, you know, army, we should support our army. So militarization, it means further militarization of society. He
Mm.
was a proponent of harsh punishment of deserters, for example.
Mm.
He was a proponent, he was against the law about demobilization because he said we will
Mm.
lost everyone because we don't have volunteers anymore. So we
Mm.
should keep those guys in the army. So
Mm.
he is not, you know, the man who will bring justice, social justice, and
Mm.
peace. And he experienced heavy influence of the West. That's why it's so
Mm.
important what will be position of the
Mm.
key Western players, meaning UK, US, Germany, and France.
Mm. And my sense is despite surface agreements, there's quite a lot of disagreement behind the scenes around all of that. And my interpretation of this, in part, is the United States kind of wants out, wants to get out with as much loot as it can and as little blame as possible. But Europe is in part wanting to continue the war, partly because it has whatever happens, Ukraine is Europe's neighbour, and that doesn't
Exactly.
change, and it has
Exactly.
a potentially enormous refugee, social kind of economic crisis
Yeah.
on its doorstep. What do you think are some of the sort of scenarios for how this war might end, and how like there's all the geopolitics of it, but more particularly how it gets experienced by Ukrainian society, I guess, because
Mhm.
you know
So when
that's where
Trump,
people are.
yeah, uh,
Mm,
there are many discussions in Ukraine society, and when Trump took office, most of
mm,
Ukrainians really believe that he can end this war.
mm,
But they really believe that he will put pressure, first of all, on Putin, meaning that he will threaten him, that he will send more weapons to Ukraine, and so on and so forth. So nowadays, many people are disappointed by Trump. But when he started to sell weapon to EU, and this weapon is, of course, for Ukraine, many internal actors within MAGA movement, many ordinary people who voted for Trump here are very disappointed because
mm,
his famous phrase, I will not start new wars, I will end wars, yeah, and our success we will measure by ending all those wars.
mm,
So, so here, many people are disappointed that he resumed this support to Ukraine, and that he is and but at the same time, many Ukrainians are very happy. And they say,
mm,
oh, finally, he started to see the real Putin. And finally, he will continue with Biden politics, but in different
mm,
way. But he will, why? Because he was the first who sent Javelin, for example, for Ukraine, not
mm,
Biden
mm,
administration, but his
mm.
administration.
Yep.
And many people believe that they are playing with his ego. They are
Mm,
trying to please him. They are trying to make a compliments to him publicly, Ukraine, different
mm,
politicians. They are trying to say, oh, you are so a powerful man. So they are
mm,
playing with his ego, with his,
mm,
sense of macho. And they say, you should, use your strengths because you are the most powerful leader. You
mm,
should, put pressure on this, little dictator. And they speculate also about the appearance of Putin, that he is small in comparison
mm,
to
mm,
yeah. So Ukrainian politicians are, they are playing with this ego,
mm,
with this, very with personality of Trump.
mm,
And they are
mm,
playing with all this, and they started to say, if you will leave Ukraine, it will be disaster to your image as a powerful leader. It will be
mm,
your Afghanistan, meaning
mm,
Biden's Afghanistan, yeah, and it will be your shame. Yeah,
mm,
because you are the powerful leader. You will damage your image, and
mm,
so they are playing with all this. But it's not clear actually
mm,
what will
mm,
be the next move of Trump.
mm,
Some people, we
mm,
know that Lindsey Graham, Blumenthal, and other hawks,
mm,
and those who are selling death, meaning those who are weapon producers. Of course, they are in favor of prolonging this war and further diving in this war. But
mm,
many politicians as well, and many MAGA supporters, they are against this. That's why we don't
mm,
know what will happen. But most of Ukrainians really believe that without US support, of course, Ukraine can survive, and they
mm,
hope that that Western countries, in particular US, will support these war efforts of Ukraine. But for me, it's a prolongation of proxy war, which will bring more destruction, more human losses, because we are just puppets. Nobody wants to
mm,
send their troops. Nobody
mm,
wants to give Ukraine security guarantees close, similar to the fifth article of
mm,
NATO statute. Nobody wants to have drones in their apartments.
mm,
Nobody wants to observe how their sons are dying for Russian drones on the battlefields.
mm,
Nobody wants to face the risk of nuclear war with nuclear
mm,
state.
mm,
That's why we observe so many different, conflicts and different, strong statements. But in reality, we should observe the real steps and the
mm,
real politics. Like France said, oh, we will not buy US weapon, Czech Republic, because they will have elections. Oh, we will not buy US weapon. Guys, you promised to support Ukraine, and
mm,
Zelensky, of course, he wasn't right. And when he said, we don't need your men, your sons, we have enough men in our country, it's not
mm,
true, because 6 million of Ukraine men didn't update their data in Ukraine recruitment offices because they don't want to fight, and they
mm,
ready to sell their houses in order to pay bribe and just escape from this open air
mm,
prison.
mm, mm,
Nobody believe because there is no clear plan. What is clear that many Western hawks want Ukraine to keep fighting, want Ukrainians to keep dying in
mm,
order to bleed Russia by the hands of Ukrainians.
mm,
What is
mm.
very obvious for many people.
Yeah,
That's
which
why,
is just so tragic, and I don't know.
yeah, it's so
To
cynical.
me, it's just morally
Yeah,
reprehensible. But
yeah,
and
yeah, I agree.
I do feel very. I mean, I guess especially for these protesters who believe in the European destiny of Ukraine and that sort of thing. I guess at the moment Europe wants to keep Ukraine in the war so it doesn't then have to deal with the post-war reconstruction, refugee, economic problems.
Criminality, PTSD, yeah,
It,
domestic violence, narco
yeah,
trafficking, weapon trafficking. We
yeah,
already have, the Parliament of Czech Republic,
mm,
the security service, some politicians
mm,
in Poland, they are very open about this. We
mm,
don't have those men here because they know that many of their families are in their countries and they are afraid of those men and they have all reasons to be afraid
mm,
of those men
mm,
because every
mm,
single war is about military trauma, it's about
mm,
PTSD, and many
mm,
of those men, they will be angry at the West. They will
mm,
be because they
mm,
already are angry at the West,
mm,
and they
mm,
full of this anger, and they can
mm,
develop this, stab in the back myth, and
mm,
they can be engaged in this terrorist attack against,
mm,
politicians, against
mm,
civil population in those countries. So, and many people say that the end of the war and this post-war period could be even more difficult and more
mm,
frightening to the people that nowadays, because nowadays many people are trying to pose self censorship, to talk about unity. Oh, please stop, it's we should talk about Russian threats because it's the main enemy, and so on and so forth. And please keep this unity. But after that, people believe it will be completely it was war all against all people. It will be disaster, and many people
mm,
afraid the end of the war even than the current war.
mm,
And on
mm,
the West especially, because
mm,
and one of the reason is many far right are now in Ukraine. When people say, "Oh, it's not true," I'm personally receiving death threats and different other nasty comments and anti-Semitic content from neo-Nazi from Argentina who is fighting
mm,
Ukraine, from neo-Nazi from Germany who is fighting in German Volunteer Corps, and now are completely integrated in Ukraine armed forces, and they are in command positions. They're not just rank and file. I am facing those threats from Russian neo-Nazis who found a space refugee in Ukraine, and many, many others. So basically, Ukraine, as a Russian army as well, I must
mm,
say. But
mm,
Russian neo Nazis who are trained by Russia, who are financed by Russia, China, or
mm,
other,
mm,
adversaries or other friends of Russia, you with your never again ethic, with your liberal values, with your
mm,
human rights and all this discourse, with mantra never again, you are sponsoring those neo-Nazis. And
Yeah.
you should ask yourself, what will happen when all those people with combat experience, with military trauma, will return to their respective homes? What will happen next? And they have already developed all these networks. They are all together. That's why this, conference nation Europe in Lviv, in my native city, was supervised by SBU and military intelligence and all neo-Nazis, Kazapon, Dritavak, Shechedrog, and other from Albania, Bulgaria, and so on and so forth. Germany, they participated in this conference. They already have this network, already. And those people are dangerous, and their views are very dangerous. They are extremists and they are radicals. And Western countries are sponsoring them, arming them to the teeth, and celebrating them as freedom fighters. So it will be one of the major problems of Western societies as well. It's not
Yeah.
only a problem of Ukrainian society, it will be
Yeah.
also a Western problem.
Yeah. Totally. And all the people in the West who've stood with Ukraine for good or for good times and bad times,
Yeah.
and perhaps with a little bit of moral blindness about exactly what they were standing for. I think, though I guess, history might suggest that people don't always have a reckoning for those kind of mistakes, but I do feel that, people can have to come to terms with what they've done at some point. But
Exactly. Yes.
yeah, yep. Marta, you've been absolutely superb discussing this and very, very generous with your time. Before we go, let me just remind everyone, I'll just get this one up again, about the open letter in defense of academic freedom and the Ukrainian historian Marta Havryshko. And this letter explains the sort of the situation that you've been put in, and as well as the broader context, including, of course, you've been added to the Mirotoverets website, which is just an appalling thing. But there are, as you can see, there are quite a few, some quite brave, and all very admirable people who've supported you in your sort of efforts to speak the truth about
Yes.
the
But
country
you know
that you fled
what was very
in fear
that
to some degree with war. Yeah.
we almost don't have signatures from Baltic states.
Uh-huh.
And it's very interesting for me because we know
Yeah.
that Baltic states have very similar problem with collaboration. One of the reasons why I'm hunted by neo-Nazis, I'm very critical about celebration of Nazi collaborators in
Yeah.
Ukraine.
Yeah.
And we know that it's not only the problem of Ukrainians; it's a major problem in Baltic states. And I must say that this exhibition created by one of the Azov divisions, where they compared themselves with members of Afghanistan Division Galicia and reconstructed these three of this photo, was was brought to Lithuania by Ukraine government, and showed in the major cities including Vilnius.
Yeah.
So Ukraine government officially say, yeah, we support these Nazi collaborators. We celebrate them as freedom fighters. And
Yeah.
in Baltic states, we have the same problem when many Nazi collaborators are still celebrated, and many members of Baltic states didn't come to terms with involvement of locals in the Holocaust. The same we observe in Ukraine. I remember when I was in Lviv and we invited our colleagues to the conferences from Baltic states. They made all this Slava Ukraini and all this, Bandera, Slava Banderi, and I was like, oh, we are so similar guys. So yeah, we almost don't have a signature. We have a lot from US, Israel, UK, France, but many people actually from UK want to be anonymous. And to my
Yeah.
understanding, many of my friends in Ukraine, they are so brainwashed. And even those Holocaust scholars, for example, Jewish themselves, they are supporting Azov and other and different Azov brigades and donating to them. And
Mm.
those brigades are so homophobic. The most homophobic brigades with the biggest concentration of neo-Nazis, open neo-Nazis who celebrate Hitler, who establish clothing brands with, Holocaust jokes, who celebrate in Wehrmacht. It's basically Holocaust denial and anti-Semitism. And all those people, they are supporting them because they say, oh, it's a lesser evil in comparison to Russia, and it's for me, no, I don't have this, system of good Nazis, bad Nazis. I don't
Mm.
have this in my mind.
Mm.
And I
Mm.
believe that celebration of neo-Nazis and all this memory politic which celebrates Nazi collaboration, it's not only about history, it's more about future and about our values. And if we
Mm.
celebrate this, it's not very good, let's say, for our children. And
No.
I'm so happy that my child,
Mm.
when his former classmates were celebrating Shukhevich the entire week in Lviv school, they were celebrating Shukhevich, one of the leader of UPA, who was Nazi
Yeah.
collaborator involved in crimes, war crimes, crimes against humanity, thousands of deaths deaths of thousands of people. Here, he was talking about the Holocaust, about Rwanda, about Yugoslavia, and
Mm.
about Holodomor. They compared different genocide. At the
Mm.
same time, it was appalling
Mm.
for me. It was so
Mm.
striking for me. And of
Mm.
course, he chose to make this project about the Holocaust, and we talked
Yeah.
about simplicity, and we talked about denial as a final stage of the Holocaust. And when he asked me, my son, what is denial? And I showed him Lviv schools.
Mm.
How they celebrated
Mm.
Ukraine Nazi
Mm.
collaborators. It's a
Mm.
denial because you
Yeah.
whitewash them, you minimize their guilt. So basically, you justify them, and it's very, very dangerous because you justify hate. You
Yeah.
justify injustice and you justify violence against civilians
Yeah.
because of their just origin, their abuse, their appearance, and so on and so forth. It's so dangerous. As a Holocaust scholar, as a Holocaust educator, for me it's so important to learn from different genocides and to learn these very important lessons.
Yeah. Absolutely. So true. Thank you, Marta. It's been a wonderful interview, and I do encourage people to check out the open letter and sign the open letter or pass it on to, any distinguished academics or human rights or journalists or, I guess intellectuals in the public sphere that you may know. Thank you so much, Marta, and
Thank
be
you, Jeff.
great to maybe check in with you in a couple of months' time, perhaps, because as we've been discussing, this Ukraine story is not going to go away anytime soon.
Of course, yeah, I would be more than
Mm,
happy. Thank you so much, Jeff, for
lovely.
yeah for invitation for this conversation. Thank you so much.